Hello and welcome to Module 3 of the speaking course. And this module is all about everything you need to know about speaking part 1. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to do today. So in this module, we're going to look at something I call speaking part 0, the format of speaking part 1 and what to expect. We're going to look at common topics, why some people mess this part up and how to avoid this. And we're also going to look at how to develop our answers. And finally, we're going to look at preparation. So in the last module, we learned about the 4 marking criteria that examiners use to mark your test. We broke each of these 4 down into simple language, and we found out exactly what you need to do and what you should not do in order to get a band 7 or 8 or even 9. And the differences between a band 7 and 8 for each of the 4 criteria. Now, that module in particular is extremely important. If you didn't watch that module, please go back. I know I say this for every module, but module 2 is probably the most important. You're not going to understand everything that you're going to hear in the next 10 modules if you don't understand that one. So please go back and have a look at that one if you haven't already. Okay, so what is speaking part 0? This is the part when you meet the examiner before the actual test begins. So part 1 begins whenever they start asking you questions, but there are 4 questions that they're going to ask you before the actual test begins. Now, first impressions should not count, but they really do. Now, first impressions means what the examiner thinks about you as soon as they see you or as soon as they hear you. Now, speaking part 0 does not count towards your mark. And there's nothing in the marking scheme, nothing in the marking criteria which says that your performance in speaking part 0 contributes to your overall mark. However, I spoke to a number of examiners about this, and senior examiners and examiner auditors and stuff like that. First impressions do seem to have an effect on scores a little bit. Now, does it affect scores a lot? No, but some people are, they're not quite a 6, they're not quite a 7, they're in between a 6 and a 7, or in between a 7 or an 8 for a particular thing, and this might sway your mark. So it's always a good idea just to create a good first impression. Remember that the examiner is doing a job and is a human being. Don't worry if they don't seem very friendly. Now, lots of people that I've spoken to, lots of students say, I didn't do very well because the examiner put me off. The examiner didn't seem friendly and I got really nervous. You have to remember that this is the examiner's job, and not all of them love their job. And like people in my course are the reason why I like to teach people at a band 7, 8, 9 level is because those people, you can interact with them. They're easy to understand. Most people doing the test aren't at your level. Most people are kind of band 5, band 6 level, and listening to people at band 5 and band 6 can get quite tiring. So you might be the 20th person that the examiner has spoken to that day, and they're not going to be really bubbly and really friendly to you. That doesn't mean that they don't like you. That just means that the person is doing their job and they might be tired. So in speaking part 0, if the examiner comes across as a bit unfriendly, don't get nervous, don't get stressed out. It's just who they are and the situation they're in, not you. You will not be marked officially on this part of the test, but it is worth knowing what to expect. So what can you expect in part 0? So part 0 questions, there are 4 questions. First question, what's your full name? Okay, so I've made a mistake there. They won't ask you what's your full name, they'll ask what's your full name. So let's just correct that. Sorry about that. What's your full name? And just say my name's, and then Say your name clearly. You're not being judged on fluency or pronunciation or anything like that, but it's just don't say my name is blah, 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 blah. If your name is in a different language to English and you say it really quickly, it will be very difficult for the examiner to understand. So just say my name's and say your name clearly. What can I call you? Just say you can call me. Now, if you have an English name, you can use your English name, but most of the time this will just be your first name or your nickname. If you have like a really, really complicated, strange name or a name that's difficult to pronounce, you probably, from going to English classes and interacting with English speaking people, you probably have a name that is easy to pronounce. So just tell them that one. Where are you from? Just say I'm from wherever you're from, and don't ask the examiner where they're from. Don't be asking the examiner any questions at this stage. Lots of times the examiner, I will say, where are you from? And the person will say, I'm from Ho Chi Minh City. Where are you from? And then it's kind of awkward because you can't get into a conversation with the person and say, oh, I'm from Ireland and blah, blah, blah. You just won't be able to do that. So don't ask them. And then the examiner will say, can I see your ID, please? And all you have to do is just say, sure, here you are. And don't speak while they're checking it. It's pretty annoying when you're trying to check someone's details and the person is talking or asking questions. So this is the only thing you need to do. My name's blah, blah, blah. You can call me blah. I'm from blah. And sure, here you are. And that's it. So this is the end of part 0. And now we're ready to begin part 1. Now we're ready to begin the actual test. So part 1 format, what can we expect in part 1? It will last around 4 to 5 minutes. 4 to 5 because it depends on your answers. If you answer the questions properly, there should be 3 topics. So they'll ask you about 3 different topics and there will be about 3 or 4 questions for each topic. It's normally around 12 questions. I say normally because some people give very short answers and some people give extremely long answers. But if you answer the questions properly, it should be around 12 questions over 3 topics. And your first topic will either be work or study or your hometown. So this will always be the first one. The examiners are told to ask about one of these in the first round of questions. So you'll be asked 3 or 4 questions about work if you work, or 3 or 4 questions about study if you study, or 3 or 4 questions about hometown. So what are the common topics for speaking part 1? 3 most common topics are work, study, hometown, or your home. The reason why these are the most common are these are the ones that the examiners have to ask. So as I've already said, the first questions will be about work or study or your hometown, your home. So does this mean that you should prepare answers for these questions? Absolutely not. Do not prepare answers for these. Don't memorize answers for these. The examiners can spot this, and it's really, really obvious when somebody has memorized an answer, because the rest of your answers which aren't memorized are not going to be so good. So just answer these naturally. So you'll only be asked about one of these. You'll only be asked about work or study or hometown or home. So again, no need to memorize any answers. The other 2 topics will be about you. This means that they can ask you anything about you. So it could be about your family, your free time. It could be something really strange like your favorite color. It could be your, photographs, TV, books, holidays, whether you wear a hat or not. It could be something really strange or something mundane. I've analysed hundreds of past tests and there are no common topics. So if you see somebody or if you see a teacher or you see a website or a book that says these are the top 10 common topics for speaking, they don't know what they're talking about. I literally sat down with hundreds and hundreds of past papers and I tried to identify any common topics. And apart from those three at the top, work, study, hometown, your home, you have no idea what you're going to get. So don't be preparing answers based on that. So why did I say that there were common topics? There are no common topics. I really want to emphasize that, because a big mistake would be for you to prepare certain topics and expect them to come up. There are hundreds of topics which could come up, and there's no way that you can prepare hundreds of topics. So it's impossible to predict what you will be asked. And the questions are about you, so it's impossible to get them wrong. So I'll say this again. The questions are about you, so it's impossible to get them wrong. Don't overthink these questions. Remember, the examiner just wants to know what you think. They want to know about you. So there is no correct answer or wrong answer. All they want to know is, so do you wear a hat? They just want to know whether you wear a hat or not. They don't want to know the definitive answer on hats or people wearing hats. They just want to know what you think about that. So don't overthink them too much. So why do some people mess up part one? From doing hundreds and thousands of speaking tests, here are the most common reasons why people mess this up. They prepare memorized answers. So it is extremely obvious when somebody memorizes an answer. How can we tell? You can just tell straight away by the amount of detail and the intonation and the sentence stress and everything. And just the whole thing, you can tell it's a memorized answer, especially when you compare it with a more unusual question that you ask them. So a trick that the examiners will do is, if they suspect that you are giving them a memorized answer, they'll ask you an unusual question. A question that I try and trick people with is, what color do you think reflects your personality? Now, that is a question that people definitely haven't prepared. And what happens is they will have given you a memorized answer, and then you'll ask them that. And what they'll do is, I don't know, pink, and it's a terrible answer. And if you memorize answers, you'll get a band 0. They give very short answers. Do not give one-word answers or, very, very short answers. If they ask you, do you work or do you study? Don't say, I work, or don't say, I study. If they say, where's your hometown? Don't say, my hometown is Belfast. That's a very, very short answer. But do not give very long answers. I don't know why, but this was very common when I worked in Vietnam. When you ask somebody, tell me about your hometown, they would tell you for about 4 to 5 minutes about their hometown. They would tell you about the architecture, about the history, about the traffic, about absolutely everything. That is not how a natural conversation works. Remember that the part one should just be like small talk between two people. If somebody asked you, tell me about your hometown, you would not talk for 5 minutes. They think too much about the answers. So remember that these are questions about you. You can't get them wrong. There are no marks for task achievement or task response. There are no marks for the content of your answers. All you have to do is just answer the questions because they are about you. If you overthink these, what happens? Your fluency goes down and you lose marks for fluency and coherence. So try not to overthink them. And they get stuck when they get an unusual topic or question. So I always ask people, what's your favorite color? What color do you like in nature? And people go, oh, I've never heard that before. But again, if I say to you, what's your favorite color? That's an unusual question, but you could say pink, black, blue, purple. I don't have one. I have lots of them. It doesn't really matter what you say as long as you say something that's fluent, the grammar is correct, the vocabulary is correct, and the pronunciation is clear. As long as you're doing that, it doesn't matter what you say. So please don't say, I don't know, I've never heard, never thought about that before. I don't really, don't say something like that. Just give an answer. They seem like they don't care or don't want to be there. So again, there's no marks. There's nothing in the marking criteria which says you have to care. But it creates a very, very bad impression. I was speaking to someone last week, and it was obvious that their partner was forcing them to do a speaking test with me. They didn't really want to be there, and it just created a really bad rapport between the both of us. And it was obvious that, you know, they didn't want to be there, and kind of wasting my time and wasting their time. You know, and it also affects your intonation. If you don't want to be there, you are going to have a very flat, you're going to speak with a very flat tone, and it will also mean that your fluency and coherence is not so good, because you won't really give very long answers. You tend to give quite short answers. They're so nervous that they can't perform properly. So part one is when people are most nervous, I find. As people go through the test, they kind of become less nervous. But in the beginning, some people can be very, very nervous. Like, you ask them simple questions. You know, why do you like your job? What do you not like about your job? What job would you like to do in the future? Really simple questions, and they find it very difficult to answer because they are so nervous. And they talk to the examiner like a recording device. Now, this is true for most students. They don't speak to the examiner like the examiner is a human being. They talk to the examiner like they are a human recording device. And we're going to talk about on the next slide why that's a problem. So, how can you avoid all of these things? So, answer the questions naturally and spontaneously. So don't prepare memorized answers, just answer them as you would normally. If you were in, let's say, an English class, and normally in an English class, in the first couple of days, the first couple of classes, the teacher just gets you to talk to each other, you know, ask each other about, get to know each other. Or if you were on a date, or if you just met a new colleague, and they asked you simple questions like, what do you do in your free time? You wouldn't you wouldn't really give a memorized answer. You just answer them spontaneously. So try to do that. The more natural and the more spontaneous your answers, the more fluent and better they'll be. Develop your answers appropriately. So don't be giving very short answers. We're going to talk about this more, but for part one, 2 or 3 sentences is more than enough. So not too long, not too short. So, and also don't be giving a speech. You know, if somebody asks you, describe your hometown, don't talk for 5 minutes. You know, 2 or 3 sentences for part one is all that's really required. Remember, these questions are about you, so there is no need to think deeply about the answers. So if I ask you something really simple like, what did you do last weekend? You do not need to really think deeply about, like, oh, what did I do in the morning, and then in the afternoon, what did I do? You know, I don't expect you to give me every single thing that you did last weekend. Just say whatever comes into your mind. There's no way that you can get these wrong because they're about you. So don't be thinking very, very deeply. If you think very deeply and you think very hard about the answers to these questions, your fluency is going to go down. And expect the unexpected. Part one, what happens a lot is students think that it's going to be hometown, family, work or study, and something like free time or something like that. And then when you ask them about hats or about photography or about their favorite colors, they stumble. They don't do very well because they didn't expect it. So if you expect difficult questions and you deal with them well, you do much better than the other people. and pretend like you care. Pretend, I know that it's a IELTS test. I know that it's not the best experience you're ever going to have, and it's just something that you want to get done. But for those 15 minutes, pretend like you want to be in the room. It will create a good first impression, and it will also mean that you're forthcoming with your answers and your pronunciation is good. I know that it might take a lot for you to do that, but pretend that you're an actor or an actress for 15 minutes and pretend like you care. And take this as an opportunity to relax and get into a groove. Now, what do I mean by that? Part 1, you're going to be judged on the whole test. So your speaking is going to be judged on the test as a whole. But part 2 and part 3, to be honest, are more important. So take part 1. I'm not saying that part 1 is not important, because it is, but take part 1 as a chance to get relaxed. To relax and get into the groove means to get into a rhythm so that you become more and more relaxed in part 2 and part 3. It's a natural human thing that when the 10 minutes before you start your test, when you're sitting outside the room, you're going to be very, very nervous. And when you walk into the room, you're going to probably be extremely nervous. But when you sit down and you start answering the questions, the nerves and the stress are going to dissipate. They're going to go away a bit by bit. So try and aim that by the end of part 1, you're very relaxed and you're happy to answer questions. And also treat the examiner like a human being. The best, like band 8, band 9 students, it feels like you're talking to a colleague or a friend or someone you just met in a coffee shop or some sort of social interaction. It doesn't feel like an exam. So if you treat the examiner like a human recording device, it's going to feel and sound, you're going to sound like a robot. But if you talk to them on a human level, then everything will be much better. And do that even if they're really unfriendly. Unfortunately, there is a range of friendliness when it comes to IELTS examiners, just like there's a range of, with anybody or with any profession. Some of them will be really nice, some of them will not. Some of them will be horrible. There'll be a small percentage of them who will be extremely nice and a small percentage of them who will be extremely unfriendly. Most of them will kind of be somewhere in the middle. But even if the person is quite unfriendly, try and be nice to them. Just pretend you're speaking to a friend. So, key skill, develop your answer. We're going to talk a little bit more now about how to develop your answer. Okay. So one of the big mistakes students make in part 1 is giving very short answers. However, developing your answer does not mean talking as much as possible. Your answers should be not too short and not too long. One word or phrases is obviously too short. If you're including more than 3 sentences, I think this is probably too long. So we've already mentioned all of this, but I just wanted to reiterate it to make sure that you understand before we move on to looking at all of these different ways to develop your answer. A very simple way to make sure that you develop your answers is to simply answer the question and then add an extra piece of information. If you do this, you'll be sure to follow the not too short, not too long rule. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at adding these extra pieces of information. So extra information number 1 is just giving explanations. This is the most obvious way to add extra information, and we can do it simply by adding a word like because. Now, the words that we're going to discuss now are very, very simple. You do not need to overcomplicate these. This is not IELTS writing where you need to use, cohesive devices or linking words that are, academic or high level. When you're speaking, you don't use those type of words. We're just going to use simple words. Example, how often do you read? So a bad answer would be, I read every night before bed. Why is this bad? It's just too simple. Or not too simple, sorry about that, too short. A better answer would be, I read every night before bed because I find it difficult to get to sleep and reading fiction relaxes me and switches off my brain. So what I've done is I've extended the answer, I've developed the answer by simply putting in because and then a reason, an explanation. So that's one way that you could develop your answers. The second way is by contrasting information. And we do this by simply using a word like but or although. Again, two very simple words. Example, do you read every night? A bad answer would be, I normally read Monday to Friday. So again, too short. So a better answer would be, I normally read Monday to Friday, but at the weekend I tend not to read at all because I go out on Saturday and Sunday night with friends and I'm not in the mood to read when I come home. So that is a much more developed, you've added extra detail by using a 3-letter word, but very, very simple. Extra info 3, combine details. Very simply, we combine two things by adding the word and. Now again, extremely simple, but extremely effective. Do you read every night? Bad answer, I normally read Monday to Friday. Better answer, I normally read Monday to Friday, and I also like to read during the day on Saturday and Sunday, as those are my days off and I have more free time to relax. So I've just added in extra information by using the word and. Very, very simple. Extra info 4, past comparisons. So this is when we use the phrase used to compare the past and the present or the future. Example, do you read every night? Not anymore. Bad answer. Better answer, I used to read all the time, but since I became a father, all of my time is spent looking after the new baby, so I don't have time. So again, you can see how I've used the phrase used to compare what I used to do in the past and then bring the examiner up to what is happening in the present. Extra info 5, talking about the future. So we use will or be going to talk about the future. Example, do you read every night? Bad answer, not at the moment, maybe in the future. So, you're not giving the examiner enough to work with there, but a better answer would be, not at the moment, but I'll definitely try to read more next year when I have more free time in the evenings. And probably the most common way we can add extra information is just to give examples. An easy way to develop your answers is to add an example. Do you read every night? Yes, I do. Not a very good answer. Better answer would be, yes, I do. Like last week, I got into a really good book called XYZ, and I couldn't wait to get into bed each night and read it. Now, I haven't used for example, or for instance, or something like that, because that's a little bit too formal and academic. Now, for example, you could use that in the test, but the word like, is what most English speakers use whenever they are talking, well, where I'm from anyway. And it's just a simpler way to say that. So as you can see, I've just added in my book. I don't read a book called XYZ. If you see XYZ, that's just me showing a random example. Okay, so extra information 7, frequency. You can use words like usually, never, always, and more often than not to extend your answers. So you can talk about how frequently you do something. So advanced tip, use one of the many frequency idioms. So there are lots and lots of idioms that talk about frequency. Example, do you read every night? No, not often. A better answer, once in a blue moon, I'd say, because I'm normally so tired by the time my head hits the pillow, I'm out like a light. So if you did this, the examiner would be really impressed because you've used an idiom there. Instead of not often, once in a blue moon kind of means rarely. And you can look up frequency idioms. If you Google frequency idioms, you'll find lots of them. And I often warn students about using idioms that they don't really understand. But frequency idioms are very easy to use, because you know the examiner sets you up, because the examiner will say like, oh, how often do you do that? Or when you're thinking of an answer, it's quite easy to insert this and for it to sound natural and for you to get it correct. So preparation, how can you prepare for part 1? So you must talk to people. It's really, really obvious. And please, please, please don't just say, I've no one to talk to. And that's just an excuse. If you actually put your mind to it, if you actually thought about the number of opportunities, both online and offline, there are to meet people and talk to them, you would actually find someone if you thought about it. Like I had one student who lived in a place where there were very few native English speakers, but there were a lot of tourists. So what she did was she went and got a job in the local Starbucks next to one of the tourist sites. And 90% of the people that went into that Starbucks spoke English. And what she did was she just made small talk with them. So small talk is just when when you first meet someone and you just ask them about their day, about how things are, talk about the weather, about their families, everyday things. So she just talked to people when she was serving them, and she really, really developed her speaking by doing that. Now, should you go and apply for a job in Starbucks? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is get creative with how you can, either offline or online. I mean, online, there are hundreds of thousands of places where you can look to get to be able to speak to either native English speakers or people like yourself trying to learn and trying to practice their speaking. I don't need to help you with that. It's pretty easy to use Google. Ask someone to ask you questions. So go and get the recent past papers. They don't even have to be recent. And with your mother, your brother, your partner, whoever, your friend, just get them to be the examiner, to play the role of the examiner and to ask you the questions. And Google, again, will help you out with those questions. And if you're really alone, and you're probably not, there are very few people in the world right now who don't have access to English speakers or people who want to practice English, then you should just look at the past papers and record yourself. So in review, what did we do in this lesson? We looked at speaking part 0 and the things to expect and why it's kind of important. Format of speaking part 1 and what to expect. We looked at the common topics. There aren't any. Why some people mess this part up and how to avoid this. So some do's and don'ts really we looked at. And kind of one of the key skills for part 1 is developing our answers. So not too short, not too long. And we looked at how we can prepare. In the next module, we're going to look at everything you need to know about part 2. Now, I have a very, very specific technique for people to use in part 2, so you definitely want to tune in to that module. So I'll see you again soon, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.